is a really big deal, that you're deciding that you want something different enough to take that step. Oh my goodness. What I've been through is trauma, and what trauma says to the brain is the world is an unsafe place. And then I started realizing that self-sabotage, like procrastination, perfectionism, people pleasing, those are all coping mechanisms. Your best strategy, your best decisions can't come from a place of survival mode.
Hey, Elyssa, welcome to the show. I'm excited to talk to you today.
Hey, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, girl. I mean, so much of your work, God, is so relevant to myself, to this audience. And so I'm really excited to dive in. I want to just kick it off with some rapid fires, as I always do. We just like to get right into the meat because as we were just before we hit play or before we hit record, we're like, man, there's a lot of questions. We've got a lot of questions to cover. And I was like, we got to get to all of them. We're going to do our best. There's so much good stuff here. So let's just roll right in. I want to start this off with your top 3 strategies for women to stop people pleasing and start prioritizing themselves.
100%. This is such a great, juicy question to dive in with first. Okay. The bottom line is, if you are a people pleaser, if you sabotage yourself, if you're having struggles just being authentically you in any situation, that means that is your red flag symbol that you are in survival mode. There is some part of you that is trying to protect you with these unhelpful coping mechanisms like people pleasing, procrastination. So here is my 3-step framework. It's the most simple thing. You need to memorize these 3 S's, and this will help every single time if you start to notice that you're doing those things. So the first S is safety. Your survival brain needs to know you are actually not running from a wild animal. And so this first S has to do with sending deep breaths through your body to tell your brain you're safe. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing is self-nurturing. You can call it self-care, but I like to say self-nurturing because you need to nurture your 5 senses. So that's the next thing you do after you take your 3 deep breaths. You do something for your smell, sight, taste, touch, and sound. It could be making just your cup of tea because this hits 4 out of 5 senses. And then the third thing is to get yourself some safe support. So connect with someone that loves you because it's going to plug your survival brain back into the idea that you're part of a herd. So you're not going to be chased by a predator.
Love it. Okay, but before we move on to the next question, real quick, you said something that was so freaking interesting to me. You referred to people pleasing actually as an unhelpful coping mechanism. Talk to me about that.
Absolutely. When you're little, your brain will help you do whatever it takes to get your needs met because not thriving is not an option, right? Not getting your food, shelter, clothing, love, attention, connection. Your brain can't survive if those needs won't be met. So the first time that a need goes unmet in childhood by a caregiver or whatever else, and you're there coping by yourself, which happens to every human, right? It's not because you had a bad childhood. It's not because of thing. It's just, that's how it is. You go with your needs unmet sometimes. Your survival brain is like, oh wait, we need to be better. We need to work harder. We need to do more in order for this person to be happy with us because that's got to be the key to getting our need met. So people pleasing starts at a young age as a way to make sure that our needs are guaranteed to be met. But if you hold on to that coping mechanism and that's your brain's go-to way to keep you safe your whole life, you become an adult in her midlife who's realizing, I don't know who I am anymore. And we've pleased away a lot of our years.
It's so fascinating to me. And I love that you refer to that as an unhelpful coping mechanism. I talk to women every day who are stuck like in the people pleasing cycle. And I think that one of the things that I talk about is when it comes to these types of behaviors that we're doing, whether it's people pleasing or maybe we're like constantly doing for everybody else and not prioritizing ourselves and kind of a little bit of like the martyrhood type situation. I found with myself that there was a payoff actually that I was getting from that it was helping me to cope, that I didn't realize. For me, what it looked like is that I felt needed when I was people pleasing, when I was doing for everybody else. But that I think stemmed from when I was a kid. And that was the coping mechanism that I developed in order to get my needs met. I think for me, it was probably when my parents got divorced and I did, less time with both parents. What I know for me is once I realized that is when a lot of the healing started for me. And I started recognizing my patterns. So I just think somebody's listening out there and you are a people pleaser, starting to look at that through a different light as far as where that comes from.
Yes. And I think so often we're told it's such a bad thing. Oh, don't be a people pleaser. Like I grew up my whole life being like, you're weak if you're a people pleaser and you just need to be your own person. But really, thank God for people pleasing, because if you didn't develop protector part inside of you that wanted to keep you safe and found that people pleasing was the way to do it when you first started out, like that's the thing that got us here, man. I mean, that's why we survived. So it's really not a bad thing. And if you can work with it instead of being like trying to squash it out or just try really hard not to do it, it's actually a lot better for you.
Yeah, 1000%. So if you had to choose one powerful daily habit that can help midlife women break free from procrastination, what would it be?
There's one question that you can and need to be asking yourself over and over if you're a procrastinator like me.
Okay.
And that is, first of all, you have to kind of notice it, right? But when you're procrastinating, this is the one question that will change everything for you. What feels unsafe about completing this task? That's the only reason we procrastinate, is because your brain thinks that there is something unsafe about completing it.
So interesting. You know, it's funny though. I wonder for somebody like me, because I'm total opposite, but to a fault. I get so much anxiety about having like stuff on my plate that I'm the total opposite. It causes me anxiety to worry about like, because I'm afraid I'm going to forget something. So oftentimes I will run myself ragged doing stuff. I sometimes have a hard time triaging what needs to be done because I have so much anxiety about maybe I'm going to forget to get it done. And I don't know for me if that, as I'm saying this out loud, I'm like, I don't know if that goes hand in hand with like my fear of failure and like perfectionism and all of that. And that kind of, they go together. I don't know. But yeah, I have a total opposite problem.
Yeah. So I call them the 3 Ps. They travel together. They're travel in a herd. It's procrastination, people pleasing, and perfectionism. You don't have to have all 3, but chances are if you ever learned to be hard on yourself, you have at least one, if not more, of these 3 things going on because they're go-to coping mechanisms for your brain. So I would say probably, I mean, I'm not analyzing you. We just met, but I think it makes a lot of sense. If you're the kind of person who's like, oh, I'm not putting that off because like I got to get it done. Usually that leans into perfectionism. And I'm a recovering perfectionist, people pleaser, procrastinator. I've got all 3 of these throughout my inner being. It's really something where you just have to recognize which way are you leaning. For you, maybe it's what feels unsafe about waiting until later to do this, because all procrastination is not actually procrastination. A lot of my clients will come to me and they'll say, I'm procrastinating this thing and I decided to, whatever, they're building their business or whatever. And they're like, I decided to not do my social media batching today because I wanted to write this email. And I'm like, that's actually not procrastinating. Procrastinating is something that you're doing subconsciously because you don't actually feel safe to complete the task. If you're just deciding to rearrange how you do things, it's okay to put things off or to take a break before you finish. But if it feels unsafe to take a break before you finish, or if you feel like you're bad or say it's procrastinating or something, there's probably some part of you that needs it to be just right. And so we don't risk putting it off because we're going to not be that person.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, I do think that what feels safe for me is probably like maybe the fear that I'm going to forget to, like I'm going to not do it or something. And because I'm such a doer and like I'm such a oriented person and I'm always like, go, go, go. Because then if I forgot to do it, then what would that say about me? Subconsciously, like I failed that, right? If I forgot to do it. Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah. I'm like, I never thought about that.
Yeah, it's really true. And that fear of failure goes back to childhood when we learned that, hey, listen, this is what happens if you don't get it right. I feel like this was almost traumatic for me to figure out that I had a less than perfect childhood, not because I didn't have great, because like you think, oh, I had great parents, everything was so loving, it was so good. And then you're like, but I came out with these really difficult self-beliefs. Like there must have been something that wasn't tracking. And so, in my childhood, it was like, you just got praised if you performed well. Nothing happened if you didn't perform well. And like, I needed the praise, right? So I learned how to be perfect and not let anyone know that I made mistakes. I learned how to push things off. As an adult, it was like crippling anxiety and depression and all these different things. But all of that was really just to protect me from perceived failure, really, in childhood.
That's so interesting. I think I was, and God, my dad, rest his soul, he was the best. I loved my dad, but I used to always blame that I had developed this perfectionism from my dad because I would get A's and maybe 1 B, be like, this is awesome, but what happened to this B? But in reality, something just came up for me that you said that really it may have been a combination because my love language is words of affirmation. That's how I receive love.
Yes.
And so I wonder for me if I really needed the praise too. And so I can't put all this on my dad, but like, so it's probably a combination because I had a great childhood too. But I think that was like kind of the perfect storm. Maybe I'm a words of affirmation. I craved the praise. And then my dad also being a little bit of a perfectionist, that makes total sense. Yeah.
100%. And kids that grow up with a parent who is constantly pointing out the things that were less than perfect, that child will be a perfectionist. There's no other way for it to be because it's just an orientation. It's safety seeking, but it also is a way of looking at the world. I remember being 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 years old and constantly looking for the next thing that I could prevent that might go wrong. So I feel good right now, but the next thing that could go wrong could happen any second. I was never settled. And no wonder I was like in adrenal chronic fatigue and like all these things in my 20s and like suicidal and just really went through this crash and burn because I had spent my whole life waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yes.
Instead of listening and being able to rest, even if all the work isn't done, and being at peace. I can't even tell you how wild it is as an adult in my 40s saying, I want to do this thing, and then I just go and do the thing. For my fellow procrastinators who might be listening, it's a foreign concept when you start being able to just decide what to do and then you just go do it in peace and you're not freaking out about it or fighting yourself. So I can just like decide I want to go and I want to prepare a presentation. I want to pitch myself to this, whatever, this conference or something. And then I just go do it, even though it's scary or big or something I hadn't done before. So it's wild when you start to overcome your coping mechanisms.
Well, okay. So now I know there's procrastinators in the audience right now that are going, okay, well, Elyssa, how did you do that? That sounds awesome. Yes. Yep. How do I do that? How did you start to do that?
I snapped my fingers. I just changed.
Exactly.
No, it really comes down to I'm a certified life coach. And when I first got my certification, I was going through multiple traumas that I did not recognize as trauma because I had this idea that trauma is like you got hit by a car or you came back from a war or something like this, these big, difficult things that are violent and really terrible. As I started to recover from my traumas and start to recognize what had gone on for me really from a psychological perspective, I started to understand there are different levels of trauma. And it's not like one is better or worse or harder or not than the others. It's just that they look different. So there's big T trauma, and that's big bad stuff that should never happen. That is like the being a war veteran, massive violent thing that happens, being attacked. And then there's little T trauma, which is now being more commonly talked about. And that's kind of more everyday traumas. It's like being bullied over a long period of time, losing a pet and not knowing how to cope. Those are things that are non-violent, but still very emotionally disturbing. In the last 10 years of coaching, I started to notice that there is another specific way that I wanted to talk about a different angle version of little T trauma, but I call it tiny T trauma. Tiny T trauma is smaller emotional needs going unmet in childhood. Dad pointing out the B every time there's a B on the report card and things like this. For some people, that would not register as a tiny T trauma. For some people, that would be the tiny T trauma that they're struggling to deal with as an adult. It just depends on how your makeup is and what your personality and characteristics are. When I first started to realize, oh my goodness, what I've been through is trauma, and what trauma says to the brain is the world is an unsafe place. And then I started realizing that self-sabotage like procrastination, perfectionism, people pleasing, those are all coping mechanisms. That was when everything shifted for me. That was when I could actually clearly see myself for the first time.
I'm just curious, when you started to have this realization, then like, what do you remember the first time that you're like, okay, I'm going to do the thing. I'm just going to go do it. And the first time that you actually did not procrastinate on it?
I don't know if I remember the exact scenario. I remember the sensation, and it was about 5 years ago because it's wiring in the brain. I was wired for decades in a way that says, okay, you put the thing on the list, but if it's scary, we wait to do it. You know, we stay up all night the night before the project is due and we turn it in at 6 a.m. That was how I was wired to do it because I was terrified of not doing well. And another way that you can be terrified as a procrastinator, it doesn't make you a bad person, by the way. It's not like a bad habit. It's just a coping mechanism. But one of the ways that I really utilized procrastination as a coping mechanism was if I do it ahead of time and I have time to do my best work and I still fail, what does that say about me? But if I do it at the last minute, oh, I've been so swamped, I had to stay up all night and do this thing. I mean, there's an excuse in that, right? Like I can prove that I still have value because, oh, I didn't do my best work. Or maybe, oh, I work best under pressure. There are all these reasons that we come up with to continue the coping mechanisms that keep us safe inside our mind because our mind is an unsafe place until we learn to rewire these narratives that we have. I remember the sensation about 5 years ago. I'm trying to remember. It was probably something for my business. I was kind of going online with my business about 5 years ago. There were all these things I had never heard of and like software systems that I didn't understand. And I was around online entrepreneurs that were like way ahead of me and like had Forbes articles and like all these things. So my little survival brain was like, you do not belong here. Imposter syndrome is one of the biggest ones that comes along in adulthood in particular because we just think, oh, I don't have anything to offer. Like, what am I here for? Like, why would they listen to me? I remember looking at items on my to-do list. It just kind of sneaks to the next page and the next page, like and the next page. I had one of those and I just looked at it and I was like, I'm just going to break this down into something really tiny that doesn't feel scary. And I did. And then I broke the next step down into something tiny that didn't feel scary. I kept doing that and the task got done on time and I just blew my own mind. I was like, that wasn't painful. So you have to build a track record of doing that enough times where it's not hurting you. It doesn't feel painful emotionally to go through this process. And you have to kind of curb the negative self-talk. That was a huge part of me being able to stop procrastinating because the negative self-talk will perpetuate the cycle. You're going to fail. You're not going to be able to do your best. You don't know what you're doing. All the different things that can come into your mind. The harsh self-talk really helped me when I got over that.
I love that. And yes, I love the tip of just breaking it down. I know when I've got something I have to do in my business or just like in life, like for me, yeah, that is my go-to because I can get overwhelmed just like, oh my God, there's so many different moving parts to this. And if I can just break it down, I'll do a quick brain dump of like, okay, from A to Z, this is what has to happen to get this done. Boom, 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 boom. And then I have like a plan and I know to like check things off, do all the things. So,
yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, let's keep rolling here. I want to know what are the top 3 emotional triggers that you've seen that contribute to mom guilt and how can women address them? So what really triggers mom guilt in women and how can we navigate that?
Okay, so this might be counterintuitive, but it's actually not parenting that causes mom guilt. It's actually prior limiting beliefs that get reinforced. So that negative self-talk that get reinforced by parenting. And so a trigger is an emotional flashback to something from before. And mom guilt is a trigger. It's an emotional flashback to some prior belief about yourself that you walked into being a mom with. So the 3 things that I would say are probably the top emotional triggers for this are the belief that you're not enough. So that I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail, I'm going to fail. That belief that comes into adulthood with us. The need to work harder. Again, that idea that if I can be better, do more, work harder, then I'll be someone who deserves to have my needs met. And then comparisonitis. I was like trying to think of another word for this, but like really comparisonitis is the problem because it kind of goes hand in hand with imposter syndrome as a mom because we're all just out here doing our best.
Right.
We're all just out here failing our way forward. My son, I have a account for him that I'm saving into and he gets to use it for therapy or college. It's his choice.
I think about this all the time. I'll have a moment where I obviously wasn't my best and I'll think to myself, well, he's going to be talking to his therapist.
I guess I know what they're talking about in 10 years.
Yeah, that's a chair conversation.
Exactly. So when we start to compare, I mean, my word, I literally just experienced this yesterday. Instagram is not a safe place for my mom brain because there is this couple on Instagram, God bless them, that they thought of this when their son was a tiny baby. And I was just trying to like not emotionally or physically bleed out the first year of my son's life, not let him physically bleed out. That's all I was doing. This couple is like, every year on our son's birthday, we put him to bed and then we drink his favorite drink of the moment. We write him a letter that we're going to give him on his 18th birthday. And I was like crying. I was like, I'm a terrible mother. I'm a terrible mother.
Yeah,
no, I exaggerate. Those moments are out there, man. So the comparisonitis, it is strong in social media and just in the mom groups that we're all a part of. So you just really have to watch for those 3 things. If you came into this parenthood walk feeling at all like you're not enough, feeling at all in order to deserve good things, you need to work harder and be better. Or if you came in kind of looking around the room, seeing what everyone else is doing and measuring yourself by that, those are mom guilt triggers all the way.
And you know, it makes so much sense when you say this because that is a reoccurring theme for me of like the not enough thing. And so I think if I'm really being honest, when I have those moments where I feel the mom guilt, it's because the story I'm telling myself is I'm a shitty mom. If I don't go to his baseball game because I've got something else going on or whatever, then even though I've been to every other 75 million baseball games, like if I miss that one, I'm a shit mom, right?
Yep.
Like, and so I think so that's really interesting. Yeah, that stems from, the stuff before I was even a mom. Yeah. I love that. Yeah.
It's all performance issues that we came into this walk with. And what we want to remember in those moments is, okay, so today maybe I missed the baseball game, but you know what? Are we going to have a conversation about it? Does he understand why I missed? And does he understand that it's not that work trumps this? Like, I mean, I was out of town for an in-person podcast interview a few hours away and I was like racing back for his first soccer practice and I missed most of it. And I'm feeling like, oh, that, because it happens no matter how much, by the way, I'm the poster child for healing from all this stuff. And it still affects me. I'm still rewiring the beliefs. So I get to the soccer practice late. He like sees me from the field. He's like in his last 5. And his first question is, where were you?
Yeah. And you're like, oh.
God love him. And I just sat down. I said, well, remember, I was doing this thing for work, but I just want you to know that the reason I do these things for work are so that we can have the life that we have together and so that we can do the soccer practices and things. And how amazing is it that you had auntie and uncle and your cousin? My parents, he calls Nani and Donk. It's how cool is it that they all wanted to also come. Look how loved you are. Look how special that was. So it's like really growing him through it, because the other thing is, especially like if you're a single mom, that's one of the specialties in your audience is you're really helping women come into their own as single mamas. We carry a big load, on our shoulders for all the parts of child raising and self-actualization for ourselves and for the child. The really big thing is we don't need to be present all the time to be great moms, physically or emotionally. And the fact that we can take the time to work through that with our children, they need to understand that they don't need us all the time. as they get older and older. So it's really important that we set boundaries that suit the family that we're in. The feeling like I need to sit down after his birthday. I missed it. His birthday was last month. I should have written the letter. I should have been drinking the apple juice. Like I should have, like I'm 10 years late. Oh no, we got to just look at what are we doing now? They have to understand that we're going to drop stitches. We're going to miss things, and we're still going to have all the love and hold all the space for them.
I love that. Absolutely. So what are a couple more that I want to hit you with? These are such good nuggets. In your experience, what's the most recommended step for women in midlife? The first step they should take when they feel stuck and unsure really how to regain control of their lives. There's a lot of women in my audience who are navigating divorce. And I know for myself, like I was a time in my life where I felt very stuck and very out of control. Like my life felt out of control. And a lot of women just don't know really what to do. What would you recommend their first step is?
Go back to basics. We need care. If you are in a place where you feel stuck and unsure, that is terrifying AF.
Yeah.
You have to really nurture yourself through that. And so it really takes just slowing down and really paying attention to yourself and going back to the very basics. What morning routines make you feel like you can face the day? What nighttime practices help you get the most rest that you can get? And it sounds easier than it is. There's also, I have to tell you about this concept if you haven't heard of it, revenge bedtime procrastination.
No.
Have you heard of this?
No. What is
This
that?
is a specific type of procrastination where you push off bedtime and you stay up too late doing things for you because you didn't get enough care during the day.
Yeah.
And you're just like, kids are in bed. I am going to binge this series. Like I'm going to be watching the true crime documentaries until 2 a.m. and then you wake up the next day and you hate yourself. Those patterns are things that, especially as women who are going through big transitions in life, it can feel very raw all the time. And so really looking at, are there things that I can do to nurture myself through this? Because your best thinking, your best strategy, your best decisions can't come from a place of survival mode. You have to be at least somewhat grounded. And actually a really practical way to do this, everybody wants to get your phone out real quick, put a reminder in your phone once an hour during your waking hours to take 3 deep breaths. You can literally bypass your survival brain response that's going to tell you, don't pay attention to how you feel, ignore the feelings, numb out with food, with doom scrolling, with watching your shows, numb out, don't be present. The 3 deep breaths will help you check in with yourself and really help you get out of survival mode and take the next right strategic step.
Yeah, I love that. I love the advice of just getting back to basics. You're so right what you said about you can't make your best decisions or decisions. You have to be able to operate from a place of clarity and strength. And that comes from the simple stuff like, girl, get some sleep, go for a walk, like make sure you're eating, like eat nutritious foods, like really get back to the stuff that you know to do to take care of you so that you can be operating from the best place that you can possible. And you talk a lot about self-sabotage. And here's the thing with self-sabotage. Self-sabotage, I feel like it is, I don't know, it's a word that can get kind of thrown around sometimes. Like, what does that really mean though? And so I know I love how you define self-sabotage as what you said, like procrastination, perfectionism, and what was the third one?
People pleasing.
People pleasing, right? The 3 Ps. Yeah. Those are forms of self-sabotage. Would those be the top 3 then signs that someone is self-sabotaging?
Those are the indicators that self-sabotage is happening. But I find that especially because self-sabotage, like if I just go up to a woman on the street and I say, hey, do you self-sabotage? She's going to be like, I don't think so. No, killing it in my job. I'm doing the things. Her first thought isn't going to be, yes, I self-sabotage. If I go up to her and say, are you a procrastinator? She might really resonate with that.
Yeah.
But there are actually other ways that you can tell. So if you can't really identify oh, I procrastinate and I now understand that that's self-sabotage. If you're not falling into one of those categories easily, one of the things that you can pay attention to is, do you keep trying to achieve your goals, but you just kind of can't quite do it because life gets in the way? That means that there's probably some level of sabotage going on. It feels a little bit like we're the victim in that scenario. And for those of us who have been through really rough relationships or a really difficult divorce or things like this, you have probably been victimized in some ways. But it can be tempting to think that the reason you're not actually living your dream is because of things out of your control. But if you find that you're just like, okay, I make the plan every January 1st. This is the year that I put me first. This is the year that I take that taekwondo class, or that I take the tennis lessons, or that I go out dancing. And then it gets to be the next December 31st and you haven't done those things. You're probably sabotaging. There's something in there that doesn't feel safe about putting you first or whatever those goals are. Another way that you can tell you're sabotaging is if your needs always come last. That is kind of a badge of honor as a mom. Like, I take care of everyone else first. Like, I'll sacrifice my own well-being for my kids to have the perfect childhood because I didn't, or because we've had a divorce and now I want to make sure that they know that they still have a good childhood. If your needs are always coming last, it's actually not healthy for your kids, and it's really bad for you and your healing process. It will keep you in survival mode. And then another thing is just the obvious one of not finishing what you start. It really has to do with longevity. How long are you staying with the things? Like, I'm telling you, go back to basics today, like do the 3 deep breaths every hour today. Are you able on your own, of your own volition, to keep that going if it's working for you? Or do you peter out after a little while? There's probably a part of your brain that's saying like, this is too hard, or really it's not doing anything, or like you talk yourself out of things that are good for you.
Well, you mentioned something a second ago I want to go back to when you were talking about always putting everybody else first, and you said it's unhealthy for the kids. How is it unhealthy for the kids?
Isn't that a crazy concept?
Right.
So a child that sees that their parent is sacrificing for the child's benefit will grow up with massive guilt. And that child, they can sense when we're sacrificing too much and just putting on a happy face, even if we never try to let on that it's happening. That child will then internalize that it's their fault if their mom never gets a break. They'll internalize it's their fault if she never sleeps. And so they grow up with this deeply flawed feeling, and they will perpetuate the patterns of self-sabotage and protector parts as an adult.
That's so fascinating. So where's the balance though, right? Like, I wonder, it's like, okay, like, because you said sacrificing too much. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? How do you know if you're sacrificing too much, right? I can tell you I don't know that my son's going to have that problem because every single day I scream at him to freaking put the dish in the dishwasher. Okay. He's the honey badger that doesn't give a shit. Okay. He just leaves it out there. So I don't think he's worried about that. My daughter, maybe. But like, how do we as moms, and I think, God, especially as single moms, like doing it on our own, like, how do we know if we're sacrificing too much? And then like, what is that balance?
Girl, this is the $1 million question, right? I mean, this is what we're all after. Everyone says work-life balance. And I'm like, what the hell is that? Like, what? I don't, Here is the truest north that I have found in my personal journey and the women that I work with. Tune into yourself so hard that you can tell when you're giving too much, whether it's for your kids, whether it's for your job. If you can tune into yourself at this deep level of quietness, when you can tell that your inner little girl is screaming for attention or screaming to slow down, that's the moment that you're starting to give too much. So if you lose track of yourself while you're parenting, if you find that you're losing your temper a lot with your kids, if you find that you are feeling every morning, like I have a client right now, she wakes up angry every morning, knowing that she's got to clean the house, knowing that she carries the mental and emotional load for the family and the kids, knowing that she's not bringing in enough income to help the family. So it's just like nothing she does is ever enough, and she wakes up angry every morning. Well, we started tuning into that anger. What's the anger saying? This is too much. And anger says there needs to be a boundary. So when you're feeling angry, oftentimes there needs to be a boundary set. And it's awesome and excruciating to learn how to set really proper boundaries with your kids. Like in her case, it was like she was carrying the whole load of cleaning the house every day. And she has children that are old enough to help, but she didn't want to necessarily enforce that because it made her feel like she wasn't living up to the standards that her husband had for her as a wife and a mom. And so it's like, how do we then ask for what you need and set boundaries with the children, and then have consequences that are logical, and really make sure that everything is being led by what your true self is saying inside? And she had years to kind of undo of ignoring herself and abandoning herself, which is what most of us have. So if you're not sure, I don't know if I'm sacrificing too much, I'm kind of miserable all the time, and it's just like, or whatever, like my life is good enough. Again, 3 deep breaths. Ask yourself, what do you need today? And then you'll be able to find, it takes lots of practice, but it's easier as you go. It's easier than you think it is to really get in tune with, where's the line? Am I giving too much?
I think it's a struggle too. And especially, again, speaking to, this isn't just for single mom. I feel this in myself. And I also like talk to women. I think it's just because like, do I go throughout a lot of my days feeling like, because I'm uber mom and I'm running my own company and I'm doing this. And then do I feel like I'm stretched too? But sometimes I think we can just feel like, well, what choice do I have? Right? Like that's the story we can tell ourselves. Like, I don't have a choice. Like, I got to do this. And so what advice would you give to the woman though, that feels like, well, this is like, if I don't do it, who else is going to do it?
Right. Literally, this is the question I deal with every single week with my one-to-one clients. We all learn if it was going to get done, it's going to be us that does it.
Right.
And so this is where you start. If you don't want to be the one to do it, that is your indicator that there's another way for it to get done. So if it's not within what can flow naturally for you, if it doesn't align with your ultimate, why am I doing what I'm doing? Does this get me where I want to go? Or does this just perpetuate the hamster wheel? wheel. We're asking ourselves those questions on a daily basis. I can't even tell you, Amber, how many miraculous solutions have come out of nowhere when my clients start to write down the things that make them miserable. Like for me, one of my things was I don't want to change the tiny trashes around my house. I hate it. I don't know why. Like I hate that. Who else is going to do it? Like I'm not going to just like assign all of that to my son. You know, it's like just the two of us. The dog can't do it. Yeah. I wrote that down, and one of the girls that had helped me with something else, and I'm a huge fan of like finding affordable help as a single mom. One of the girls that helped me with something else, I texted her. I was like, hey, I like your work ethic. Do you know anybody that has a work ethic like you that'd be willing to come and just like change out these trashes and like do a couple other little things at my house for like this very small amount? And she goes, oh my gosh, I'll totally do that for you. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah. I was like, okay, I don't have to change my tiny trashes anymore. It's the best thing ever. But that's just like a physical example of household stuff that was like making me crazy. I have clients that have all kinds of things. Like they don't want to be cooking every single night and coming up with stuff from scratch that 3 people in the family are going to say that that's the worst meal they've ever had. You know, it's like whatever it is that's making your life miserable, write that down and ask for an answer. I have seen windfalls of money come from nowhere. I have seen helpers appear out of nowhere. I have seen friends and family that we're not leaning on. If you go through life believing that this is just how hard it has to be, you will miss all the helpers that are placed in your life.
I love this idea though of so simply making a list, because I think what can happen is like we just kind of go through our day and everything just kind of adds to it, right? And you're not thinking about it, right? I mean, think about this, women listening who are feeling overwhelmed in their day or whatever that looks like. Like imagine if you could just pick off like one thing every single day. Well, guess what? In the end of a few months, you have a lot of the things that make you miserable off plate, right? Yes. I share this story all the time because I gave up matching socks a few years ago. Like I don't do it. It makes me miserable. I bought a bin, all the kids and my socks, they all go in a bin. You want to match your socks, go get it. Then I even started just buying unisex socks for all 3 of us because I'm not doing it anymore, right? But
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. See, and if you had just said, well, this is just how it has to be, we just have to have the socks match because how else are people going to find the socks and blah, blah, blah. Like even before you bought the unisex matching socks, right? Like somebody's life is a little more complicated because you took something that was soul sucking out of your daily routine. Like, oh my gosh, don't match the freaking socks.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Well, I want to switch just a little bit to talk a little bit more about trauma. I know you are a trauma-informed life strategist. So first of all, what exactly does that mean and how you help people? Trauma and I was like, break it down.
Fantastic question.
Yeah. What does that mean?
So really what that means is that I have a lot of training in how to help people recover and how to recognize other people's trauma and my own, and how to help them shift their mindset and rewire the actual brain patterns that are affected and sort of instigated by trauma. So that's really what I do for my job. You can kind of think of me as like a mindset mastery expert. Like I will help with whatever brain thought patterns and neural pathways are keeping you stuck. I'm the one that can come in and be like, hey, this is why. Do you remember? Like, tell me about this, tell me about this. And then I'll ask questions that will tell me, okay, yes, this is where this came from. Doesn't that current day issue make sense based on what you've been through? And so I kind of help the past and the present make sense.
I'm just so curious, like, you know, when people come to you, like, what are they mostly struggling with? How would somebody know, okay, you know what, I'm feeling stuck? Because there's all different kinds of support out there, right? So there's talk therapists, there's somatic healers, there's all kinds of different, you know, modalities for healing. How does somebody know, okay, I need to come see Elyssa? Like I need a trauma-informed life strategist. How does somebody know what's going on in their life?
Okay, so specifically working with someone like me. So I focus with women who are professionals, like they've got a career or they've got a business. So female founders who are CEOs of their own businesses. And the reason that you would work with me and like grab my support as opposed to somebody else's is because you've tried and tried to stop these patterns that you've noticed that you have that are keeping you from playing bigger. So you're playing small, you know that you've got big dreams, but you're really struggling to find the bridge from here to there. A lot of life coaches can help you decide, okay, here are your goals and here are the steps to reach your goals. My specialty is you've tried that. You've tried therapy. You've tried great books like Mel Robbins' 5-second rule. Like I've tried these habit creating directions and I am still in the same cycle. And that's when you know you need to bring somebody in who can go under the layers with you and go back to the root cause.
I love that. Well, speaking to trauma though, how does trauma show up differently for women in midlife in particular and in comparison to younger women, right? Is it just that we're older and we just know more? How does trauma show up
smarter?
differently?
No.
Yeah. How does it show up differently? And like, what challenges then when trauma shows up in midlife? What does that look like?
Trauma looks different no matter what age it happens to you. Essentially, what I find is so wonderful and really empowering about women in midlife addressing trauma is because they have a very clear sense of self, much more so than we're able to in like our teens and 20s, right? So once you get into later 30s, early 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, we have lived some life and we have experienced some stuff. If you have the blessing at that time in your life to awaken to the fact that stuff has happened to you that you might want to heal from, it's way more likely that that's going to happen in midlife than it will earlier, because earlier on, we kind of just assume it's normal. And it took me going through multiple types of abuse, trauma, medical stuff at the same time for me to realize this was not just me doing a bad job at life. It's like actual stuff that was happening to me. And I needed to heal from it. And I find that women in midlife are much more able to and likely to seek out healing. So it's really a blessing. If you're listening to this today and you're like, man, I just know I'm like messed up, or like, I don't even know who I am. I don't have this sense of self. You have the awareness to notice that. That's different than somebody most likely who's in her younger years. I think is a beautiful trait that a lot of us share.
Yeah, for sure. Well, somebody who is listening today and they're feeling inspired, they're like, yeah, guess what? I want to get rid of procrastination. I'm feeling inspired, right? They just don't know kind of where to start. I know we've touched on this a little bit, but as we're kind of rounding this out, is there one piece of advice for somebody who is maybe in a point in their life, they listen to self-help podcasts like this, watch it on social media, they just feel inspired, they're consuming all the information, but they still just feel uncertain or a little bit paralyzed to take that first step and making some change? What do you say to them?
Oh, I say that's really normal. You are confronting yourself when you first take that step to go and have someone walk through this with you. You don't know what you're going to find under there. And so I'll tell you, I was at a speaking engagement a couple of months ago, and my main message to this group of 800 women was the moment that you decide to do something different than you've always done with the information that you have, the moment that you decide that you want something beyond what you have right now, that you want to heal more, that you want to change something, you become dangerous to your own survival brain. You become a threat to yourself. That's what's stopping you. So it's a worthy adversary that you're up against. Your survival brain is going to try to stop you from healing because it doesn't know. It says the world is an unsafe place. So just know that you have what it takes to be dangerous to that part of your brain and to live through it, to tell about it. So just know that it's going to be confronting yourself to take that next step. Be so gentle with yourself. This is a really big deal that you're deciding that you want something different enough to take that step. Wait till the moment that you feel ready and then gently move forward and you'll be able to do it.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that, just normalizing that, yeah, this is a big step, right? Yeah, so it is normal to want to put it off and feel scared and all the things. Well, after working with so many, women in midlife, what do you think is the most empowering mindset shift that they can make to create lasting change? We have so many women listening to this that are starting over in their life, or women that are looking at their life, they are midlife and they're wanting to make some shifts. What is like the most powerful one to make sure that it lasts?
Your whole life, your brain has been invested in protecting you in a certain way anytime it senses stress. What's wild is that by rewiring that specific response, you can actually let it go and leave it behind for good. So by taking a little time right now to rewire decades of negative self-beliefs, harsh self-talk, whatever it is for you, whatever those limiting beliefs are, it only takes about 6 months to change those neural pathways. If you do consistent little things over a period of 6 to 9 months, your brain will be different and changed forever. You can just leave behind all your defaults. So it's a little bit of hard work to undo decades of pain and trauma and limiting beliefs, and it will last forever.
And I love that when you talk about these little things, though, are these like the types of things that you work with clients on? Are there some things that the listeners, maybe even one thing that the listener could do on their own to start this rewiring process? What does that look like?
So the 3 deep breaths are key. That's where I start everybody. So just really set that reminder in your phone. Every hour, take 3 deep breaths, my friend. Whatever friendly message you could put on your phone. And then if people want some more, there's actually a nervous system regulation technique that if you do this twice a day, every day for a period of time, your nervous system will just feel safer and you'll find that you're making very different, even better decisions than you've ever made just by doing this exercise. It's actually in my TEDx talk. We call it polyvagal hands and it has to do with your vagus nerve. That's another great thing. If people want to go and watch the talk, it's the last 2-3 minutes of the talk. So just just doing some little tiny habits during the day that bypass your survival response. And also, by the way, everyone should just know this just because you should know this. It's not something that you will ever have learned. And so I want to make sure that people understand your survival brain treats every stressor like it's a life or death situation. If you're 5 minutes late for a meeting, for example, it will have the same effect on your vagus nerve, which is the main nerve in your nervous system that sends off the warning bells, as though you were actually running from a saber-toothed cat back in cavewoman days. So the fight, flight, fear, and fawn responses are going to be the immediate go-to. And part of that is the self-sabotage type stuff that we're talking about here. So just know any stressor affects you this way, and it will stop affecting you so strongly if you can do daily things that bypass that response, like the deep breathing, like the polyvagal hands, and things like that.
And I love that. And just some of these simple things. The TEDx that you did, that was a TEDx on procrastination, right?
Specifically, yes.
Yes. Okay. I love that. And yeah, we want to have a link to that as well. So I love that. Well, lastly, what's a mantra or practice that's personally helped you to stay grounded and empowered on your journey? I know you mentioned the 3 breaths, so maybe that is the answer. Women who are really looking to make some change and step into their fullest potential. What's really, really helped you, kind of a daily practice or mantra?
Such a great question. Thank you so much. We've been talking about this idea that tuning into ourselves is the solution to so much of this, right? When I am struggling, and this has been a huge part of my healing from all the multiple types of traumas, from a childhood of perfectionism and people pleasing, all of this, it comes back to, I put my hand over my heart, I take a deep breath, and I ask who I imagine to be my inner little girl, I ask her, what do you need right now? And I sit with that for a second and I wait for the answer. And for a long time, it was really hard for me to sit still and wait for the answer. It was hard for me to actually take the time to ask. But if you can practice that habit, you become your own, it's so cheesy, you become your own best friend. But
it is
beautiful.
true.
And I have this relationship with, I call it a separate person. It's not a separate personality. It's just this little part of your brain that's tried to protect you this whole time. She's just like tugging on your, we need a break. We need a rest. We need to not turn this project in because it's too scary. I think of her as like a little girl who's just been tugging on my shirt tail this whole time. I abandoned her at the side of the highway of life so long ago. I had to actually go back and get her and ask her. I mean, like she's like bruised and not okay. And I'm like carrying her. I'm like, I'm sorry I left you. I have this whole, relationship with her that had to start with me collecting her again. But asking myself that question with my hand over my heart immediately centers me back with what's really needed for myself in the moment. And that always leads to the best outcomes for me.
I love that. And I do have a similar practice. And for me, it is sometimes I have to be quiet and then I have to ask myself again.
Yes.
And then I have to ask myself again, like, no, girl, it's okay. It's okay. This is a safe space. Just say it. Because I think that we're just so programmed, even with ourselves, to just kind of push it down. Right? And so sometimes it usually takes me like 3 times of asking myself before I'll be like, okay, this is what's going on. And I love that practice too, because I know for me, even just like as a single woman, even like entering back into the dating world, it helps me to get more in tune with just what the hell I need and what I want. And then you start to become unapologetic about asking that of yourself. And when you can get really good at responding to it with yourself, I think you become, at least I did, like less afraid to ask other people for it as well.
When you're really confident in what you need, I mean, that was for a long time, I didn't know that I had the right to need the things that I think I needed. And when you get really clear and very confident about what it is that you need, and I had to do some work around deserving it. Like, do I deserve to have an easier life? Do I deserve to not have toxic people around me? Do I deserve to make more money? So there's a lot of work that goes into it. And that one little question, what do you need? You might get the answer. You might feel like, I'm not allowed to have that. I'm not allowed to have a break. Right. I'm not allowed to have the money. And so then you go back to her and you say, babe, I see that you're really struggling to believe that we could have this. So I'm just going to sit with you and we're going to just be here together because I believe in you. And I said that to myself until I started really believing it.
I love that. Elyssa, thank you so much. You had so many just nuggets to share with listeners. And I love that. They are definitely going to want to get more of you. So where can the listeners find you and learn more about just your practice and your coaching and all that you do?
Oh, thank you so much. I would love to connect with anyone that wants to connect. I have such a heart for just helping as many women as possible understand that it's not your fault and you can change it when you're dealing with these limiting beliefs. So you can connect with me on LinkedIn, Elyssa Smith, on Instagram, Elyssa C. Smith. And then I would love if anybody wants to come join my little free community. It's called the Stress Less Lounge. And we're just over there like talking about our trauma, make life better every day. So come on over and join us.
I love that. We'll have all that in the show notes for sure. But Elyssa, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Amber, for having me. This has been so much fun. Thank you.
Yes, for sure.